Hi, welcome to 20-Minute Christian Counselor. My name is Robb. I've been a pastor and a counselor for over 30 years. And in this podcast, I provide biblical counsel for the practical matters of life. So if you're experiencing some struggles, either personally or in a relationship, and you're looking for some helpful wisdom, keep listening for the next 20 minutes or so. You'll be glad you did. Hi, welcome back. Today's question is one that I think is really important, but I don't feel like it gets talked about very much, or at least not enough. And the question is, how can we, as a married couple, have and maintain good, healthy relationships with our parents and our in-laws? And really what we're going to be talking about today is this whole idea of boundaries. You know, the boundaries word. It's been around for a long time. Last few decades, it's been a really hot subject. But it is very relevant here. And let me just explain to you what I mean when I'm talking about boundaries. Boundaries are rules. They're guidelines. They're limits. They're expectations. They're the way that you want things to be in relationships with other people. So having no boundaries, or having unclear boundaries, or if you as a couple have differing ideas or opinions on what your boundaries should be, that's going to create problems. That's going to create confusion, tension in your relationship, disagreements, stress, conflict. In other words, it's going to be a mess. Let me give you a few examples of poor boundaries with parents and in-laws. Having unexpected and frequent visits from them. Some of these you're going to chuckle because this is your life right now. Receiving unsolicited input about your spouse. Getting unasked for advice about how you're raising your children. Having your parents or in-laws buy things for your home without you asking or approving. Hearing comments about your diet or your body. And overall, just interfering in your personal lives. These are just some of the many examples that probably you are experiencing to one degree or another that all reflect a lack of boundaries or a misunderstanding of boundaries in your relationships. So developing and communicating clearly the boundaries to your parents and in-laws is going to make your relationships with them and your marriage relationship a lot healthier, a lot more enjoyable. Everybody's going to understand the rules. Everyone's going to know the expectations. And you're all going to recognize how these relationships are going to work. Now, I think we need to wrestle with a question up front here. Is having boundaries with your parents or your in-laws biblical? That's a good question. The answer is yes. Yes. What makes this tricky, I think, is that as Christians, we understand that God commands us to honor our father and our mother, and we should. So then, how do we honor our parents appropriately, or our in-laws appropriately, while at the same time having and maintaining, implementing healthy boundaries for our own marriage and our own family? Is this possible? Yes. Yes, it is. It is possible to have boundaries with our parents or in-laws and still honor them. Let me share a couple of passages from the Bible about this. Remember, at the very beginning, the Bible says that a man and a woman should leave their father and their mother and cleave to one another, and that the two will become one flesh. One flesh, not 4, not 6 or more, to become one. And check this out. The Hebrew word, the original word that's translated leave, actually comes from a root word that means to loosen or to set free or to let go. Get it? So that's what's supposed to happen. So let's go to Jesus. And there are lots of examples. I'm just going to mention a couple here. Jesus demonstrated boundaries with his family. You remember there's a story in Mark chapter 3, verses 31 to 35, where Jesus is surrounded by a throng of people. And he's teaching, and he's preaching, and he's doing miracles and healing. And in the midst of this, some people come and say, hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers are here. They're outside, and they want to see you. And Jesus didn't automatically just stop everything he was doing and drop it all and miraculously part the crowd so he could get to his mother and his brothers. He kept doing what he was doing. He used that whole situation as an opportunity for teaching. Here's another example. You remember the wedding in Cana? I think this was Jesus' first public miracle. They run out of wine. And Mary, Jesus' mother, comes to him and tells him the situation. And basically, he says, that doesn't have anything to do with me. In a sense, he says no to his mother. He has a boundary. Now we all know, shortly afterwards, he does a miracle to solve the solution. But he didn't at that moment just do what his mother was asking him to do or address the issue. At a more appropriate time, in an appropriate way, he did what he could to fix the situation. So these are just a couple examples, and there are more in the life of Jesus where he demonstrated boundaries, not only boundaries, but boundaries with family. I want to give you a verse, and this might be a good verse for you to cling to or memorize. It's Proverbs 25, verse 17. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 17, it says, don't visit your neighbors too often, or you will wear out your welcome. Now, obviously, the word neighbors is used here, but you could plug in parents or in-laws or children. The idea is that it's good to have boundaries in relationships to keep them healthy. So that's all I'm going to say about that. It's okay with God to have boundaries, even with your parents and your in-laws. It's biblical. So, next question, how do we decide what our boundaries should be? And this is really important. And I'm going to say right now, it's critical that as a couple, as a husband and a wife, you decide upon your boundaries together as a team. Every decision, every boundary you make needs to be mutually agreed upon. You both need to agree, and then you both need to abide by the decisions that you make. A united front is essential. So this means you're going to have really good, healthy communication between the two of you. And if you're struggling with that, I have another podcast episode that focuses on how to get better communication in your marriage. So you might want to listen to that. You're going to have to dedicate time, sit down together, and talk about the issues, the specific issues and boundaries that you want to have and you need to address. And you're going to together have to make decisions about what kind of boundaries you're wanting to have for your marriage and your family. It's going to be hard work. You're both going to have to really work on speaking the truth in love. You're both going to really have to have self-control while you're doing this, so you can be quick to hear and slow to speak. And you're both, I'm just telling you right now, you're both going to have to compromise and sacrifice. You might not get exactly what you want, but what you need to get is something you both can live with and agree upon to abide by. This is a critical step in the process, that the two of you work out together the boundaries you want to have. And just remember, in all of this, seek God. Together, pray, ask Him for wisdom, ask Him for guidance, ask Him for self-control and patience and humility. Ask Him to help you in this process. Don't just do this on your own. You need His wisdom and His help. Okay, so you've done this hard work and you've come up with the boundaries that you want to have. So the big question now is, how do we implement our boundaries with our parents or our in-laws? Well, ideally, in a perfect world, you just simply begin to live life according to these boundaries, implementing these boundaries. Your parents and your in-laws recognize what the expectations are, what the limits are, they adjust, and everybody lives happily ever after. Ideally, right? Probably that's not going to completely happen. So what you're going to need to do then is communicate your boundaries to them. And there's some steps to this. I would suggest you schedule a time and maybe even go out to dinner. It doesn't have to be that we're going to have this intense family meeting. Go out to dinner or do something together where you can talk and you can sit down with them, probably one set of parents at a time, right? And share your boundaries with them. And remember to always begin by assuring them of your love, your appreciation, your respect, your desire to have them in your lives and in the lives of your children, if you have them. Just to give you some specific words, you might say something like, Mom and Dad, we love you. We so appreciate you. We really want you to be a part of our lives and our children's lives, but we've got some boundaries here, just some ways that we want to function as a couple and as a family that we want to share with you and ask you to kind of appreciate and respect and honor in our relationship together. Just remember, whatever you say, you have to be humble and respectful. And you also, just as importantly, you need to be clear and specific. All right? I want to give you some specific examples. I just made these up off the top of my head, but some of these probably are relevant to your lives. Here's some examples of what you might say. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. You coming over isn't going to work out this weekend. We already have some other plans confirmed. Let's try for another time. Or, Dad, I'd rather you not say negative or critical things about my spouse. That makes me uncomfortable. Or, Mom, I would rather you not talk about this particular subject with our children. This is something that their father and I want to address in our way and our timing. Or, I'm not really comfortable talking to you about this subject. This is something that's just between my wife and me. Or here's one. I really need to ask you to first please text or call before you stop by. It's just not working for us for you to just drop by unannounced. Here's another one. I really appreciate your concern, but this is something we'd like to try to work out ourselves. And if we need or want your wisdom or your input, we'll be sure to ask you for it. Here's another one. We want to be available to help you with this, but we can only do it on this and such day at this and such time. Or even sometimes it's as simple as, no, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for us as a couple or as a family. This is something we want just our family to do together. Thank you for the invitation, but we're not going to be able to be there. We haven't had any time with just the two of us for a while, so we need an opportunity just to go out together as a couple. Here's one that might be relevant. we don't feel comfortable with you using that kind of language or talking about these things around our children. And one more. We don't feel comfortable having the kids around that person without someone else also being there. So in those examples, I tried to address a lot of different issues and scenarios and just give you some words you might say. And one thing I want to say and remind you of in this whole process is always express appreciation whenever you see your parents or in-laws making choices that are abiding by your boundaries. It's called positive reinforcement, right? You want to provide as much positive reinforcement and appreciation as you can. That's going to encourage them to continue to abide by your boundaries. Okay, now we get to a really hard question. What do we do if our parents or our in-laws won't respect our boundaries? And that's probably why you're listening to this podcast episode today. This is where it gets tough. You know, in healthy relationships, people respect other people's boundaries and abide by them, even if they don't understand them, even if they don't agree with them, if they want to be in relationship with them. Now, if your parents or your in-laws won't do this, well, first you might need to just initiate another sit-down together, kind of address the specific issues, the specific boundaries that aren't being recognized or appreciated, re-explain what they are, and always make sure you explain why you have them. That might help them to understand. And then after this second discussion, maybe just give them some more time again, let life go on a little bit and see if they get it and if they adjust. And hopefully they will. But if they don't, or they won't, well, then you're probably going to have to make some choices about pulling back a bit in the relationship. What that might look like, well, reducing contact with them, reducing interaction with them, not including them in as many activities, maybe, essentially kind of sharing less of your lives with them, and ultimately doing whatever it takes to prioritize and protect your marriage and your family. And remember, if you have to start doing some of these extreme measures, do them incrementally, and always remember what the goal is. The goal is not to punish them, not to get back at them, not to hurt them. The goal is to help them to understand your boundaries, to begin to respect them and abide by them. That's the goal. And as they start to adjust, if they do, you can ease up on some of these issues about pulling back and not sharing as much. Hopefully, you won't have to go to these kind of extremes. But if you do, hopefully this will get their attention and motivate them to start to respect and abide by your boundaries. And this is really hard because it might get to the point where your parents or your in-laws are upset with you. They're unhappy with you. And let's be honest, most of us don't like it when anybody is upset or unhappy with us, especially family and especially parents or in-laws. But sometimes you're going to have to allow them to be responsible for their actions and their feelings. And here's the reality. You can't please your parents or in-laws and your spouse all the time. And if you have to make a choice, the right choice is to prioritize pleasing and meeting the needs of your spouse. Your spouse should never feel he or she is coming in second to your parents. If they're feeling like that, that's a red flag. Something needs to change. Remember, it's your life. It's your marriage. It's your family. And this may sound weird, but once you get married and you have your own family, your parents don't necessarily have a right to be part of that. It becomes more of a privilege. And you get to decide what that looks like. And they need to respect your boundaries so that they can earn the privilege of being a part of that. The bottom line is it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, it doesn't feel natural to have to start parenting our parents. And yet, in many ways, that's what this is like. And sometimes this is what we have to do. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility and your prerogative to set the boundaries that you want to have in your marriage and for your family. And it may not be easy, but it's really important. The good news, let me end on an encouraging note. Your relationship with your parents or your in-laws can get better. Remember, nothing is impossible with God. I believe God wants them to be better. Of course he does. But it's not going to happen all by itself. You have to be intentional. You need to start implementing these practical steps and strategies that I've just shared with you today. And just remember, you don't have to do this in your own strength and wisdom. You can't. You need God's help. And the good news is, he wants to give it to you. Thanks for listening today. If this has been helpful to you, I want to ask you to do 3 things. First, click the follow or subscribe button so you can find out right away when my next episode is being released. Second, write a review and let other people know how this has been helpful to you. And finally, tell your friends and family so they can benefit as well. Also, if you have a question you want me to answer, reach out to me at my website at robboram.com. That's ROBB, 2 B's, ORAM.com. Until next time, keep your eyes on Jesus.